Scenic Jacksonville's mission is really dear to me. It's one that is shared by leaders across our city, and you can see it in many of my administration's priorities. Growing a thriving downtown, preserving our historic buildings, expanding our tree canopy in resilient ways, creating world-class parks, which, as Michael mentioned, are funded, and placemaking efforts that attract neighbors and visitors alike. The decisions we make at City Hall are about choosing what kind of community we want to be. One that is bustling, thriving, and meeting its promise, or a city of endless renderings and untapped potential. I think you already know where I see Jacksonville between those two options, and it's exactly where we are heading. Jacksonville is one of the fastest growing cities in America. We can't change that fact, and we don't want to, or at least most of us don't want to. But it does bring up a quintessential question that we have to ask ourselves each and every day. How do we harness our growth without losing Jacksonville's character? The answer to that question is what will set us apart as we strive to be one of the greatest cities in America. We're making real progress on that front, and I hope you can feel it. Our quality of life keeps getting better and better by the day through the efforts of organizations like Scenic Jacksonville and our work at City Hall. As this journey continues, we welcome the opportunity to hear from leaders who have brought their cities to new heights. And to that end, I would really be honored to introduce this evening's keynote speaker, Carol Coletta. Carol is a national figure in the revitalization of cities and public spaces. For the past 8 years, she has served as president and CEO of the Memphis River Parks Partnership, a public-private partnership whose mission is to work with and for the people of Memphis to trigger the transformative power of the river. In 2023, the city of Memphis and the partnership celebrated the opening of Tom Lee Park, a newly transformed 31-acre riverfront park running along the Mississippi River. Designed by Studio Gang and Scape, with substantial community engagement and concept planning, the park is the centerpiece of the city's riverfront and a national model for welcoming and ecologically restorative urban parks. Coletta's work features senior leadership positions with the Knight Foundation, Kresge Foundation, and Art Place, where she championed creative placemaking and cross-sector urban initiatives. Coletta has also managed grant portfolios exceeding $60 million, driving success in 26 communities and reimagining civic spaces. She led the 2-year startup of Art Place, a unique public-private collaboration to accelerate creative placemaking in communities across the U.S., and was president and CEO of CEOs for Cities for 7 years. I want you to say that 5 times fast. I practiced that so many times so I wouldn't trip over it. Previously, she served as executive director of the Mayor's Institute on City Design, a partnership of the National Endowment of the Arts, U.S. Conference of Mayors, and American Architectural Foundation. Recognized twice by Planet Eisen as one of the most influential urbanists and honored with the ASLA Legas Medal, Coletta continues to redefine how we think about public spaces by turning infrastructure into vibrant, inclusive environments that bring communities together and spark collective imagination. Doesn't that sound wonderful? Are we ready to hear from her? Carol, please come up. Welcome, Carol, to the stage.
But I want to thank Scenic Jacksonville, especially Nancy, and for bringing me here tonight. Every city needs a Scenic Jacksonville that looks to absolutely, I agree, that protects and promotes the natural and built environment. I think all of us know that it is really hard sometimes to build a constituency for what doesn't seem urgent in our cities, and then one day we look up and just as the mayor said, we've lost the essence of who we are. And as the mayor said, you're in a great position, you're growing, you want that growth, but you also want to preserve what really is Jacksonville and lift that up. So I appreciate the work you do. You have a lot to protect and promote in this city. And you got a lot of waterfront. Lucky you, because that's the gift that you didn't have to earn, you didn't have to buy, you didn't have to, go out and beg someone to bring it to Jacksonville. It is yours. And you have so much to work with. I was looking at Scenic Jacksonville's website recently, and it says modestly, you don't need to go far to enjoy the depth and variety of scenic beauty in Jacksonville with its abundance of waterways, beaches, marshes, parks, historic neighborhoods, and beach towns. That is so true. But I would also say, given this great asset you have, I'm not sure your waterfront is always as inviting, accessible, and connected as it can be, as it ought to be, particularly in the heart of the city, adjacent to downtown. Let me reassure you, you are not alone. That's a condition not unfamiliar to my hometown of Memphis or many cities, not just in the US, but around the world. Sometimes waterfronts are uninviting, inaccessible, and disconnected because we ignore their potential. Sometimes it's because too much of the waterfront is privately owned and you can't connect it all, join it up, which is where it really gets its great, X power. In some cities, waterfronts for decades have been filled with industrial uses, leaving a legacy of polluted land and water. In others, like Memphis, Savannah, and Pittsburgh, the waterfront is separated from the city. Ours is separated by very high bluffs. Sometimes it's railroads, sometimes it's fast highways. We've got all three of those, and parking lots. I think you've got a few of those. And in some cities, big box development on waterfronts in the form of convention centers, stadiums, museums. Sometimes if you don't leave room, commodious room for people along the waterfront, they can't enjoy the waterfront except from windows or rooftops. Fortunately, we're all getting smarter about this, and it's all finally changing. It's taken us a while. Across the globe, cities large and small, leaders and concerned citizens like you are reclaiming waterfronts for people. And you've seen these in your travels. I know you have. New York is a great example. Over the past 20 years, New York has connected big swaths of its waterfront, elevating the needs of pedestrians and cyclists while taming the cars. Not only has New York made some really fine parks, many with the help of conservancies and philanthropy, some taxing districts, but it's also made some fabulous trails connecting its parks and its waterfront to the city. Many of you probably visited Brooklyn Bridge Park, the small and mighty Domino Park in Brooklyn, the newly remade Battery Park, the piers, trails of Battery City, Little Island, to name only a few. It's sort of remarkable what's happened there. Chicago has been investing along the lakefront and the river in new ways. The lakefront has always had value in Chicago, but Chicago, particularly on the south side, south of downtown, has been slow to develop its lakefront for people, and it's done a magnificent job in the last few years. But what Chicago counted out for way too long was its river. It was dirty. When I got to Chicago to live, it was like, oh my God, you got in a what? You got in a kayak? You didn't touch the water, did you? There was a real fear about Chicago River, and probably for good reason. But what they've done, how many of you have been to Chicago River Walk? Yeah, a number of you. It really is, even with the Loop's troubles right now, the Riverwalk is still very dynamic, one of the best places in Chicago, beautifully done, and done, interestingly, piece by piece. They did a block at a time. They did what they could. They got a lot of federal money to do it, and they've done a great job. And then there's Philly, which has two rivers, And it's got two of my favorite riverfronts, the Delaware Riverfront, the Delaware River Waterfront Authority, began with Spruce Street Harbor, which is one of the best, probably the best pop-up park in the country. In fact, it was the model, the same group, Groundswell Design, did Tampa. Not the main permanent park, but the pop-up, and did a beautiful job there. And then now, because of the success of the pop-up park at the Delaware River, which you've got downtown, Old City, the Expressway, and then the Delaware River waterfront. What's happened is that was so popular, they are now capping their expressway and building a great new park right on the Delaware River, while on the other side of downtown is the Schuylkill River, and the Schuylkill built a beautiful walkway out of the river, which is innovative, except what other city has built a river walk on top of the water? I think that city is this one. Well done, Jacksonville. So cities as diverse as Washington, D.C., Detroit, which is where the redevelopment of Detroit started and continues today, Minneapolis, Greenville, South Carolina. Yes, everybody's going, yeah, Greenville. You know, they've all made these major transformations with water and waterfronts as the catalyst. So we know this works. This is not a dream. You know, we're not guessing, we're not hoping. Water works, and you've got plenty of it to make it work. We're doing that in Memphis. We have a very different condition in Memphis. We're on the Mississippi, and across from downtown Memphis and our waterfront is Arkansas floodplain, where nothing can ever be built. For the past 7 years, I've had the great honor to lead an organization, a 501c3, a nonprofit. We don't call it a conservancy, but in effect, that's what it is, that is bringing our magnificent riverfront adjacent to downtown to life. So the Mississippi River at Memphis, I would contend, is at its widest and wildest. When the river is up, you can see none of that floodplain in the distance. It's all hidden, it's all underwater. And our riverfront was barely given over to industrial uses along the 6 miles that my organization managed, although a portion of it was used as a dump. And the city of Memphis owns it all. So why would it have taken Memphis so long to capitalize on this remarkable asset? We have a lot of excuses. It's separated from downtown by very high bluffs, a railroad track, and 5 lanes of fast-moving traffic that unofficially, it's a city street, but unofficially it connects 2 expressways, not good, with traffic that moves too fast with too little room for pedestrians and cyclists. Like a lot of waterfronts, it's still not as easy to access as it ought to be, and it's certainly not intuitive. When I moved back to Memphis, that's my hometown, I moved back in 2016 as senior fellow at Kresge in the American Cities practice, and Kresge said, well, they're outside of Detroit, but they said, move to Memphis, we're going to do some funding there, you can be our Sherpa. So I immediately engaged with the group, this 501c3 that I had helped form 20 years earlier, and which was charged by the city, by a management agreement with the city, to develop and manage the riverfront, but over those 20 years had done a lot more managing than it had developing. So, you know, it felt like we had 100 years of plans for the riverfront. Someone said to me today, we've been talking about the riverfront 20 years, and I thought, oh, I've got you beat. I got 100 years. But so I thought about it, and I thought, okay, how are we going to get this thing moving? This is silly. So I organized a trip to take about a dozen people from Memphis, elected officials, philanthropists, civic leaders like yourselves, to 3 cities, to 4 riverfronts in 4 days. It was a whirlwind tour. And at the end of it, well, let me tell you why we did it. I really believe, and people only know what they know. They only know what they've seen. They only know what they've experienced. And so if you haven't seen something, if you haven't seen something, it's really hard to get sold on it. And so in this case, they stood at the end of this trip, and this is where they were talking about it, and they said, why haven't we done anything with our riverfront? Why haven't we done more? So it's a question that we needed them to ask, and that was what got the engine going. By the following year, we'd completed a comprehensive riverfront concept. The mayor wouldn't let us call it a plan. And it was a thorough review of those 100 years of plans for the riverfront and recommendations for what we do now. It was led by Studio Gang, and the inspiration and the direction that it gave us led in very rapid succession to the remaking of 2 small parks with former Confederate associations. These were moribund. There were no features, and they were done really quickly, both by groundswell, by the way. We pieced together a 1.0 version of a 5-mile bike ped trail along the riverfront. We did the award-winning 31-acre, $61 million Tom Lee Park, opened Labor Day 2023, and I've got to say, I don't think we would have that park without Jenny Busby, who's sitting on the second row, lobbying for us. Thank you, Jenny. Back in her other life. And then we were able to start with an EDA grant. I can't remember, Jenny, if you worked on that one, but the EDA grant that brought us the only free accessible observation deck that lets visitors walk out to the edge of the river and in high water over the river. And we broke ground in late last year, and although the trees are very green, and then this is what it will look like. We'll be finished with it early in 26, and I am very excited about that. So think about it. We took a 3-city tour. We saw 4 riverfronts, and that led to a riverfront concept in 2017, to delivering River Garden and River Line in 2018. We delivered Fourth Bluff Park, which included taking down a statue in 2019. We broke ground on Tom Lee Park in 2020. 2020, COVID year, we did not stop. We were one of the only projects that went forward in Studio Gang's company at that time. We kept going. And then we and then we broke ground the next year in 2024 with openings scheduled in 2026. And that's a decade of accomplishment I think any city can be proud of. And I will say, Michael, it went a little faster than the cathedral. I am not on cathedral time. Because I'm old, and I want to plant a tree, and I want that next generation to see that tree, but I want to see something now. And I hope you do too, because if you don't feel urgent about something, it won't get done. That is the truth. It is so much easier, right, especially today, to sit back and complain about what everybody else is trying to do than to do something. So I know the people in this room are committed to doing something. You wouldn't be here otherwise. So bravo to you. Get your resolve up, and let's get going here. Now, Memphis is way not done, and there's just so much more to do. And I want to mention a few things. We need to remake this fast street, and context. We talked about it at lunch today. Context really matters. In other words, what's on the edge of your riverfront, your waterfront, contributes mightily to the experience of your riverfront. It's not just about the water and the park beside it. It's about what's beside the park. And so you've really got to think about that. This is what's beside our park, and we got to, we have to make that better. We've got to find a successful, sustainable future for a 52-acre park that's sitting right out in the harbor that was opened in 1982, called Mud Island. Yes, that's what we call it. And we have a great opportunity to activate our Stillwater Harbor, something that could only be accessed by people who owned boats, not people who just wanted to enjoy the afternoon. So I want you to see a theme here. There is a theme: ambitious design, connectivity, accessibility, sustainability, and moving fast to gain and maintain momentum. It all matters. But there's something else that matters, and it's not nearly as much fun or as sexy to talk about, but I do want to spend just a minute, and that is the question of organization. How do we organize for the important waterfront work? Do we create a public-private partnership? Who does what in that arrangement? Who pays for what? There are all sorts of models for these arrangements, and the right one for Jacksonville will depend on the unique circumstances here. I trust conversations are underway on this. I certainly hope so. If not, speed it up, because you're building assets that will need to be managed. But even though I believe strongly that you need a conservancy or a type of organization that is a 501c3, a nonprofit, where people get up every day and they have one job, and that is to think about the riverfront. It's that important. But even though you want to create that, I think you need to create that kind of organization. The public input can certainly not be left behind. Public consideration, public officials and what they need and want, and how they interact with the decision-making around a nonprofit, and the money. You're always going to need a public stream of money. You cannot fund these projects unless you're in very special circumstances, like a Bryant Park in Manhattan. You can't fund these things from just private dollars or a private stream of tax dollars unless you have a hugely robust growth around these assets. So I just take that into account as you think about it. As I say, it's going to take an ongoing, predictable public funding stream if you want your waterfront that you're building to be clean and green and welcoming and safe. It's also going to require an elevated focus. Again, people get up every day thinking about this, and they're clearly accountable for its performance. And then whatever entity you create, you've got to be able to raise that extra money that typically only a 501c3 can raise. So how you structure the governance of such an entity really is critical. And the organization that manages the riverfront has to be able to bear, sort of run interference for the politicians and bear the brunt of the vitriol and the knee-jerk reactions that social media thrives on. It must be able to hold a vision and pursue a strategy that runs longer than political cycles. Because it's, I think things can go in 7- and 8-year waves. It takes about 8 years to get, we just took 8 years to get done what we got done from start to finish, and now there's another 8-year wave of work to do. So you need to be, and those visions for the first 8 years and the second 8 years, they're connected, they're joined at the hip. And you've got to be able to have that kind of continuity of vision and strategy that sometimes political cycles will get in the way of. So getting the governance right is fundamental to delivering a great waterfront. You may know the name Daniel Burnham. He was an architect and urban planner who managed the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893 in Chicago. And then he co-authored the plan for Chicago's future that school students there still study. About his plan, Burnham wrote, "Chicago hopes to educate the people, to demand delightfulness as a part of life, and to devise ways of getting it." This sounds, I think, much like the mayor's comments. I mean, is there any more obvious way to deliver delight than to open up a waterfront for people? I can't think of it. But when I say delight, and I think when Burnham talked about delightfulness, I don't think he was talking necessarily about requiring, activating, and entertaining people 24/7. Frankly, we don't have the money to do that, and it's not as if we don't have enough distractions in our lives. So sometimes we have to accept delight comes from the quiet of lapping water, or the flight of a hawk, or the burst of unexpected color in a landscape. We can be delighted by beautiful architecture and vibrant streets. And sometimes delight just comes from, a hello or a smile from a passerby. I don't know if you know the research on this, but I gotta tell you, it's a great, just remember it, put it in your pocket, remember it. Everyone is afraid to greet a stranger, right? They're reluctant to greet a stranger. But not only will a stranger, research shows, the stranger will appreciate it and feel better, but you will feel even better. So if you want to make yourself feel better, go say hello to a stranger in a public place. And sometimes, like I said, it's just being in the glorious company of strangers whose only connection is that they are all occupying the same space at the same time, and somehow feeling solidarity with one another in a world that feels so divided. I want to see more city plans that call for delight and joy and mixing and solidarity. I want to see more plans that double down on an alluring public realm. Earlier, I mentioned Tom Lee Park, that we opened just over a year ago. It was designed, I'm going to show you some pictures. It was designed by Studio Gang and Scape, and it became an instant hit with locals, and to date has generated positive press from Memphis in more than 70 international and national publications. It's been named by the American Society of Landscape Architects as an honor award winner in urban design, and last month it won the highest honors in the American Institute of Architects, New York region. In year one, we welcomed 1 million visitors to the park. And I love this, the demographics of our visitors very closely mirror the demographics of Memphis, which is one of our goals, and 94% of visitors rank it as good or excellent on cleanliness, 88 rank it as good or excellent on safety, and 57% say they met someone in the park. And that last statistic, 57% say they met someone new in the park, is deceptively important, because if you can get people across the income spectrum to occupy the same space at the same time, not an easy task, and when occupying the space together, they expand their networks and meet someone new, which we're showing they do, there is the possibility of new economic opportunity for people with low incomes in distressed communities. And the most recent research shows that matters more than education and more than family background, which I find incredible. So think about public space, not only as creating delight and joy, but economic opportunity for the most distressed people in your community. That is the possibility we have with alluring public space. But to get that done, to get this income mixing, it has to be alluring enough to attract people with enough money to be anywhere, right? You're not going to force them into public space. It's got to be something they can't have in their backyard. And you got to have people there for whom Disney World is not an option, right? They can't afford to go there. So that kind of mix exists in very, very few places today in America. Very few places, hard to get. I think professional sports do a pretty good job of it, but otherwise it's pretty difficult. So I would contend that public space may be our last best hope for getting people across incomes to congregate together, because there's more income segregation today in America than there was 50 years ago. A little less racial segregation, a lot more income segregation. So do not ever apologize for building great public space. It is essential infrastructure for creating opportunity, community, and I would argue, democracy. It makes me crazy to hear people talk about, Jenny, we used to hear this all the time. You build great public space and it's going to gentrify everything around it, and that's inequitable. It turns out that's not the case, especially when you're building public space downtown, because downtowns, they're not the most accessible neighborhoods to each of us, but they are the most accessible neighborhoods to all of us. And the good news is they're not owned by any one group. They're owned by all of us. We hold a downtown as a whole in common, and that is a huge advantage to getting this mixing that we really need. But I want to say this, it's not enough to build alluring public spaces, even if you do it with 45% MWBE or minority and women-owned business enterprises participation, as we did at Tom Lee Park. It's not enough to lift up, as we did at Tom Lee Park, the mostly forgotten story, but very powerful, of a black man who, in 1925, 100 years ago, saved a man who could not swim, saved 32 white people drowning in the Mississippi River by dragging them into a skiff boat and taking them repeatedly back to shore, offloading them and going out for more all through the night, a story of unbelievable heroism and courage. It's not enough to hire team members from nearby neighborhoods, the nearby distressed neighborhoods, which we've also done, or to start building the next generation of riverfront champions by creating classroom curriculum mapped to the park, and to host 14,000 school students in a semester in the park on field trips. We also organized apprentice programs with certifications leading to good-paying green jobs. Those things are absolutely important. We've done them. We're proud of them. But the way we run the space is equally important. If it's not clean and well-maintained, it disrespects the community. If we don't keep it family-friendly, parents won't come with their kids. If it doesn't feel safe, not just is safe, but feels safe, people with options about where they want to spend time won't be there. If it doesn't feel welcoming, people who wonder, is something this good really for me, won't come. They'll stay away. If it doesn't feel generous, then it's missing what I call the X factor. There's no formula, no recipe, nor playbook, nor no toolkit that tells us how to practice equity in public space. And if equity bothers you as a word, I know it does some people, just substitute welcoming, right? Welcoming works fine. In our case, we observe, we try things, we observe again, we tweak things, we measure, and then we tweak again. Our method is continuous learning and continuous improvement. Really, there is no one who's going to tell you how to get this exactly right. But I do want to tell you, and I want to end with two quick stories of what I believe is welcoming in practice. And see, I didn't have time to change the slides. But I think what we're learning is beginning to give us hints of how to practice welcoming in public space everywhere. Just two quick examples. The first is very simple inspiration that we had early on that didn't seem like much when we first thought of it, and that was I wanted to create a welcome center in the park. And I wasn't, as part of the program, didn't exactly know what the welcome center would do, but I thought, it'd be really nice just to welcome people when they came to the park. And maybe we could loan equipment. And then maybe that says best day ever. You can't read it, but it does. We loan equipment and we'll give dog treats and, we'll say hello. And I think that paid off incredibly for us and for our visitors. And we believe it reflects Tom Lee's deep generosity and humanity and just the neighborliness of his act, because he was indeed his brother's keeper. And then that led us to adopt, a hi neighbor message. Oh, there's the hi neighbor. And so now it's on Ranger shirts, it's on the uniforms, it's on our park cafe, and I love the greeting and the warmth of it. And the Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation has written about the impact of creating a culture that embodies the high neighbor attitude versus policing the park with guns patrolling a space. I will tell you, sometimes you need police, but we found that the vibe that everyone is welcome here, as long as you act in a neighborly way, it's a really good beginning point to create a space where strangers can feel comfortable and even joyful spending time together in public space. And then the second equity strategy we used, or welcoming strategy, was the product of an idea that I had 4 years ago when we were doing the Sunset Kayak, where we just gave kayaks out and let people paddle around in the harbor. This guy, John Best, came and played music on the water for all the kayakers. And the cool thing about John, unsolicited, is that John started giving out these positive cultural messages. He'd say, okay, now, remember your kayaks due back in 30 minutes and on the hour, and let's all have a good time, and everybody say hello to your neighbor. And it was very cool. John was an international professional basketball player, so he was always a stranger in whatever city he was in. And so he got to be very culturally aware. And I thought, man, let's keep John on our team. So John did all of our skate nights, and then we brought him into Tom Lee Park to be our first maker of culture. And he's so good at it. And what it showed, our rangers love it when he's in, because they say, oh, everything just gets really calm and friendly. And he'll say to people, now pick up your trash, that's the way we do things around here, and so forth. And it really has burned in my brain that while you can't staff all parks and all public space, we need more staffing in public space. And we don't need staffers on their phones. No. I'm saying staffers who are greeting people, who understand they are the host of the party, and I think that matters. John is a wonder. And here's a comment from a park visitor I just love. Been a Memphian for almost a decade, was celebrating a friend's birthday, and just wanted to shout out John Best, the maker of culture. The way he encouraged the crowd toward positive behavior, created opportunities for joy, and just overall added some peaceful element to the park was amazing. I've been there when he's been DJing in the courts a few times, and his presence is such an asset to the community. I hope you pass this word to him. People are noticing what a positive force he is at the park. And I guarantee you, I'm paying him a lot less than I would be paying a police officer. And like I said, when you need them, you need them. But we need to find another job that can keep the peace and treat people Again, as long as you're acting neighborly, you've got a place there. So, okay, we've talked about this, but I just want to say it again. You know, there are always going to be skeptics. In our case, we had sworn enemies who have persisted over 7 long years. In fact, there was a story in the daily newspaper yesterday about this festival that's not going to happen in our park, not because of the park. But then I looked at the comments, and one said, "Thanks, Carol," which was not a compliment. I'm like, "Thanks," you know, so we'll leave that. But, you know, there will always be skeptics. But, again, I'm going to return to Burnham because he was a master negotiator on big plans. And he warned, "Pessimists abound and have always abounded. To them, most of the big and splendid things are chimerical, an illusion," which I loved. And he went on to say, well, in 1850, there was little street paving in the U.S., not much in London or Paris. There were no great sewer systems, water systems, gas, electric power, light, streetcars, sidewalks, or other systems. But we all have these now. We do things that would make our forebears think us magicians. I love that line. So your job and my job is to be the magicians our cities need, to be ambitious, to challenge the naysayers, to bring our cities to life in a way where everyone feels included and everyone participates, not because they have to or it's the right thing to do, but because they want to. This is about parks and public spaces and downtowns, yes, but more fundamentally, it's about luring us across our differences into spending time together. It's about joy, it's about equity or welcoming, it's about opportunity, it's about trust, and it's about democracy. You have an incredible opportunity here in Jacksonville. Your anchor asset, the water itself, it's already in place. Now it's your turn to capitalize on that. And I can't wait to see what you in Jacksonville do with this opportunity. So thanks.